the 5th, 6th, and 7th of the 10 commandments recorded in Exodus? This is the question that we seek to answer today as we continue our verse-by-verse study of the book of Exodus on Walking Through the Bible.
The glory of His cross.
If you have a Bible with you, you can turn to Exodus chapter 20. We're going to be reading from verses 12 to 14. If you don't have a Bible, don't worry. Just follow along with us on the screen. The version that we'll be reading from is the New King James Version. So, Exodus 20, beginning at verse 12. Honor your father and mother, that your days may be long upon the land which the Lord your God is giving you. You shall not murder. You shall not commit adultery. Israel is now at Mount Sinai to receive the law of Moses. They are going to be at Mount Sinai for the rest of the book of Exodus, as well as the entirety of the book of Leviticus. In fact, Numbers 1:1 is going to tell us that Israel would spend an entire year at Mount Sinai, receiving the law of God, as well as fashioning the holy things required for the tabernacle. In this chapter, we have God directly speaking to the children of Israel, giving them what we would call the 10 Commandments. We have discussed the first 4 commandments in our previous 2 episodes, those commandments being not to worship any other god but Jehovah, not to use idols in their worship, not to take the name of the Lord in vain, and to keep the Sabbath. All of these laws were important, and one shouldn't be seen as greater than another, but we see a change in focus from the first 4 commandments to the 5th commandment. The first 3 commandments especially dealt with how Israel was to treat God. The 4th commandment, even though specifically dealing with a day of rest, also had to do with respecting God, for Israel was to rest on the 7th day, just as God rested on the 7th day after creation. The Sabbath day was to be seen as holy, just as God was to be seen as holy. From the 5th commandment on, God is turning the focus on how Israel should treat each other. The 5th commandment deals with how children are to treat their parents. Children are to honor their father and mother. What does this mean? Well, it means that children are to hold their parents in high regard and respect them. When living at home, it means respecting your parents' authority. I've seen many children who have grown up to do this, and sadly, I've seen other children who haven't grown up to do this. When a parent tells a child to do something, the child needs to be expected to do it. A parent must never let a child get away with disobedience, or they won't grow up to respect you. They will grow up to rebel against you. Now, I'm not saying a child who listens to you will never rebel, but a child who doesn't listen to you is almost certain to rebel. Once a child leaves home, honoring father and mother takes on an added responsibility of caring for their parents if their parents need help. This is what Jesus is referring to in Mark 7:9-13, something that we will discuss in our next study in Mark. What was the reason that children were to honor their father and mother? That their days may be long in the land that the Lord God was giving them. Children who respect their parents and listen to them tend to be children that keep themselves out of trouble and thus wouldn't do anything that would shorten the length of their lives. However, in the Old Testament, God was going to hold children responsible for honoring their parents as well. For Deuteronomy 21:18-21, any child, and by child we're talking about older children who should know better, that does not heed the chastening of his parents, then he is to be taken into the gates of the city to be judged, and if found guilty, was to be stoned. We might find this to be extreme, but note in that context the child wasn't stoned for not making his bed, but breaking God's law, being a glutton and a drunkard, and not heeding the parents' reproof. This is how seriously God views the relationship between children and parents. This was also the first commandment that had promise attached to it, that you may live long in the land, which is why Paul calls honoring your father and mother the first commandment with promise in Ephesians 6:2. The 6th commandment is that you shall not murder. Most would probably know this commandment better by the King James Version's rendering of it, which is, thou shalt not kill. However, if this commandment means any killing, then that would preclude capital punishment, which we're going to find as the penalty to many crimes under the old law. Going back to Genesis 9:6, God told Noah that if someone kills another person, that person deserved to be put to death by the hands of man. That's why the New King James Version better translates that commandment as you shall not murder, which means the unwarranted and intentional killing of another human being. The law would deal with what would happen if you accidentally killed someone, but we'll discuss that later. What is being talked about here is the unwarranted and intentional killing of someone else. Murder has always been sinful in God's eyes, for each one of us has been created in God's image. It was sinful from the beginning, it was sinful under Moses, and it is sinful under Christ. The seventh commandment is, thou shalt not commit adultery. Adultery is a sexual relationship that occurs in which one of the parties is married. For the one who is married, the sexual act is adultery, but for the one who is not married, the sexual act is fornication. That means that all adultery is fornication, but not all fornication is adultery. When God joins two people together in marriage, like he did Adam and Eve in Genesis 2:24, he expects them to become one flesh. As we discussed in our study of Genesis, becoming one flesh can mean a couple of different things, but it does mean that they were to become one sexually. By introducing someone else into the equation who you're not married to, and you have broken this one flesh arrangement by God, how would adulterers be dealt with? They were going to be put to death. That's how serious God takes the marriage relationship. And even though the death penalty for adultery doesn't exist under Christ's law, we should still view marriage with the same seriousness as God does. With that, our time is up for today. Lord willing, we hope you'll join us for tomorrow's discussion of Exodus chapter 20, verses 15 to 17, as we continue our walk through the Bible, one verse at a time. Thank you for watching today's episode. We hope that you found it edifying and ask that you not only subscribe to our channel and podcast, but that you like and share this episode among your friends, so that the saving gospel of Jesus Christ can go out to the whole world.
Of his cross.